point is, it's because of those stated values that have allowed political correction in our country. And we've seen it at such a fast rate. And it's not because our Constitution, it's because of God's Word and what our Constitution was built upon. It's because we started with a correct foundation that allowed us to move forward. And now we're throwing that foundation away. So what are some other things we're going to talk on this channel? You will find us moving back to Genesis often. We cannot help it. We love the book of Genesis. It's my favorite book. I don't know about you. I mean, maybe you had. What's your favorite book? You got to pick. You can't say, I like all the books.
Well, no, I mean, definitely Genesis, but of course, I love Romans and Ephesians and a few others along the way.
Okay.
Awfully good.
So I'm gonna pick one. He broke the rules.
I can't pick favorites.
I'm gonna pick one. I do. I love Genesis. My wife will tell you I've been in Genesis for about 5 years. I can't seem to get out. I do read other books, but I love to do in-depth studies there because I believe that starting point matters. If you don't have a correct starting point, I think if you don't get Genesis right, you are in jeopardy of reading the entire Bible wrong.
Sure.
Right. And so for me, that's why I'm so passionate about Genesis, and I can talk about Genesis all day long. I went through so many studies on Genesis because I think it's so important. So you'll hear us go to that often. Like Dustin said, we'll probably revert to Romans a lot too, because that's probably my New Testament book. Love the book of Romans. But so you're going to hear a lot of Genesis specifically because we're talking about ideas and worldviews that are changing the trajectory of the way people live. And our goal is to help you more align your life beneath the reign and the rule and the kingdom of God so that you can understand events and times better. Right? That's our goal, and that your life's not lived in vain. So we're also going to talk about more pressing things that are going on in the world right now in the events. And when we talk about these events, one thing me and Dustin have talked about off camera is that you have to talk about specific events, right? You have to, because you have to flush those things out. But you can't, I see this happening right now. So let's talk about the virus, right? And let's just bring this up. We see this happening right now, the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, right? Whether you're going to receive the vaccine or not receive the vaccine. And there's this massive fight going on, right? On Facebook, on everywhere you go in social media. There's just this massive fight. Like, this is why you shouldn't get the vaccine. And this is why you should get the vaccine. And you guys who aren't getting it are murderers. And you guys who are getting it are going to die one day. And, you just have all this rhetoric going back and forth. Instead of being able to step back and go, okay, I can understand why these people want to receive the vaccine. I get it. I understand their underlying worldview. I understand what information they're consuming. I understand what they're reading. I understand that they believe that the CDC and certain medical journals and all of those things are representing the scientific truth surrounding vaccines. I get that. I understand that. And if you receive the vaccine, I'm not going to be somebody that goes, ha! Yeah, I'm not going to do that, right? But on the same side, you have these other people who don't trust these big, which is funny to me, because these people over here say they don't trust any other system but the medical system, right? You come over here, it's like, well, all the other systems are flawed and racist, and but the medical system we can trust, right? Big pharma, we trust those guys, right? So, but anyways, over here, what you got to understand about people that aren't willing to, let me say this. My son has never received one vaccine. Click, we just lost a lot of people. But my son's never received one vaccine. But I'm not an entirely anti-vaxxer. I don't think Dustin is either when it comes to vaccines. We're not entirely anti-vaccination, but my son's never had one, right? So I'll say that before I say this. So over here, you have a group of people who don't trust systems, who don't trust big pharma, who don't trust a lot of the medical information. And you may go, well, who are we supposed to trust? Here's what I would say. Who are those people? This is a good argument you got to be able to talk about, right? Who are the people that write the information that the people in medicine are reading, right? Like, where are they getting their information from, right? So what are they being taught into? right? And I'm not saying that I have more knowledge than a medical doctor in all areas. I would never say that. I don't. I didn't go to school for that. But school is information being taught. Where did the information come from that's being taught? And don't tell me it came from purely science, because it didn't. It didn't, right? And so that to me, though, you got to understand these people. We don't trust that because we see the bigger picture and how everything else is being manipulated and how everything else is being played out, and how a virus, although it's deadly, it's also being used for political purposes to push forward a political agenda of a Green New Deal and feeding corporations billions of dollars and destroying the middle class and creating a system of elites and non-elites and destroying the middle class. Like, we see all that. And so when we talk about a vaccine, we're like, okay, how can that vaccine also be part of this? Right? And so we're extremely skeptical to these things because we see a bigger picture. And so I say all that to say we have to talk about things like vaccines, and we have to talk about things like critical race theory, and we have to talk about things such as the election, but do not get caught up in just that. You have to see that through the broader lens, or we're never going to understand each other. Right? I'm willing to understand the person who wants to get a vaccine because I'm willing to read what they read and listen to what they listen to. I'm willing to understand, as Dustin said earlier, the pastor who may see things like systemic racism and go, okay, we need to address this, and start to address it in a way that he's bringing in critical race theory without even seeing the consequences of what he's doing. And he's doing it with the best of intentions. But he's literally bringing in something that is going to divide and destroy the church in critical race theory, right? So I'm willing to understand these things, and until we get to that place, we're never going to really be able to communicate to each other to protect ourselves from these things. So we're going to talk about all these things down here, but we're always doing it from up here. So I just think that's something important to address.
Well, that's where most of our misunderstanding and where we're at odds with each other is we're seeing the same events.
Not each other.
Well, I mean, even if
Sometimes.
sure, but even if it were, it would just mean that we're seeing the same thing happen, but we're looking at it from two different sides, and so maybe we're seeing different aspects of it. We have different perspectives on it, but that's where, and that can be acknowledged. But then there's also what kind of worldview do we have? What kind of assumptions are feeding into how I see this? So not only am I seeing it from over here, but I have certain beliefs and values that interpret how I see and what I think about what I see. And so just in order to attempt to get more common ground and at least communicate, for those who, of course, we have different potential audiences here. You have those that are perhaps more aligned with us already in some of the bigger worldview assumptions that go into seeing current events and interpreting them. That's more likely to be somebody who will, continue to tune in and be able to tolerate us here along the way. And we want to help those people process it all the more and better just from our perspective. I'm sure those people would have ways that could help benefit and edify us from their perspective as well. And there are those who see things from a totally different point of view, and that's who you've been referring to. And while there's frustration along the way, and many of those interactions can get quite heated because people are passionate about what they believe. But in order to have patience and mercy and show gentleness toward those people, we want to bear with them and try to seek that common ground, but not land in common ground with them, but help them arrive and be able to see the truth of our vantage point. And of course, that sounds arrogant and presumptuous, like most people already think Christians probably are. But what we're trying to stand on God's word in our belief. What we know that the truth aligns with reality. And so we're confident in our ability to process. And what we're saying is that these events that we see and we're all trying to understand, they actually, and everybody's trying to understand them in the context of the worldview. But what we're trying to point out is those who often have a different worldview than us, their interpretation of these events doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent. You're at the same time skeptical of big institutions. You think that the government is inherently racist, that all these systems are inherently corrupt because they've been founded by white men. But at the same time, you're eager to let the government tell you must get vaccinated.
White men, again.
Yeah, all these systems that you don't trust, the healthcare system, the corporate world, all these systems that you would say are not aligned in your interest, you're lined up under them, eager to let them tell you what to do. It doesn't make sense. It's absurd. So we're just standing here trying to point that out to you and help you get at what the truth of it is. And, we are convinced that that our worldview does make better sense of these things, and it'll require you to at least attempt to see the worldview for what it is. You have to be humbled in a way to be willing to consider the worldview that allows you to make sense of these different events in a way that is consistent. And then when you do, that's where we're convinced, and many others, that our worldview makes more sense of these things. And so we're worked up and we're passionate because we feel like we see the truth for what it is, and that others are deceived. And so of course it's an ongoing battle, and it's a fight. There's where the good fight comes in.
Okay. So in terms of critical race theory, in terms of the election, and in terms of COVID-19 and the virus, let's paint a broad picture, not a specific picture, because we're going to actually use real events, real clips, current events that we're going to be talking about moving forward as they develop and as we see those things. But let's give, I think it'd be helpful, let's give a broad scope of kind of what we've been seeing happening in those things. Again, not going into the detail, but staying above the surface, and then we maybe can go into the detail in later videos. But just to kind of catch people up, right? So let's start off with critical race theory, right? For those out there that don't know what critical race theory is, again, we're here to help you understand these things. Critical race theory is an element of cultural Marxism. It's a theory that I'll just read you some of the things that critical race theory. Most of you probably heard critical race theory for the first time when Donald Trump said that he was going to start to get it out of all of our systems that we were teaching on the federal level, right? The military, all these federal systems, we're doing away with it. We're not teaching critical race theory anymore. And you might have went, what does that mean? What were they teaching? Well, let me read you some of the examples of what.
He must be against racial justice.
Yeah, which is
proves he's a racist.
Yeah, proves he's a racist. So let me read you some of the things that I went through some of the literature, and I pulled some of these things out. And in the comments, if you want to know where these came from, just ask me, and I'll comment back and tell you where I got them from. But one of the things that critical race theory teaches is that we all have an element of color blindness and a meritocracy, which equals biasness, all meaning white people. It also teaches that rationality over emotionality are forms of whiteness or white privilege. So what they're saying there is if you think and reason more than have more emotions surrounding a subject, then that's proof of white privilege. I guess they're talking about the Western world and the way that we brought rationality into things.
A rational, objective reality versus a person's individual experience
of it, yes. Another one, objective linear thinking and hard work equals success. It's what leads to success, and the nuclear family and a belief in a single God are not values that unite all American races. but instead are aspects and assumptions of whiteness that is in the literature of critical race theory. So the idea that objective linear thinking and hard work equals success, that's whiteness. That's wrong, which I wish they would have followed up with what they think ought to be in there. But I think we're kind of seeing that. And then also, which all Christians ought to be, I don't care if you're white, you're black, Hispanic, I don't care, ought to be worried about the nuclear family and the belief in one single God is also a development of whiteness. Now, what you need to understand is that critical race theory is grounded in postmodernism, which is the idea that truth can be deconstructed and then reconstructed back to what you want it to be. It's subjective. It's not objective reality. Truth has been created, and the white man has created it, and we need to deconstruct all that, and we need to reconstruct it back into our own reality, right? And the nuclear family and belief in one single God is something they don't like, although, as we've said, it's testified throughout history to kind of work because it's true. And then finally, facing your whiteness is hard and can result in the feelings of guilt, sadness, confusion, defensiveness, and even fear. So I don't know if you want to comment on that one. I'm going to pull back. But I would be defensive if I had a comment, right? Right? So it's kind of setting you up there to say something back. It's like, well, obviously you're defensive. I just told you in the definition that you were going to be defensive towards that. So you need to just sit there silently and not be defensive. So these are things that are actually in literature, right, that are being taught. And what you can see through these, what I was trying to point out with the specific things that I pulled out, there's much worse things taught than just this. But I was trying to pull out to show you, there's a word for all what I just read, and it's called racism. Literally, I don't know how else to define racism other than what I just pulled out. And critical race theory's attempts are to divide this entire nation in class and in race. And they want to divide us so that we will devour one another. That's literally what it does. It divides and it destroys. And they are teaching an entire generation how to be racist. Blacks to be racist towards whites. And in return, it's going to cause whites to be racist back and get infuriated by it. Right? And you're going to see this massive race war break out in this country if we continue in this direction. I guarantee a race war if we continue in critical race theory, because ideas have consequences. And I'm not a prophet. It's always happened this way. If you teach this nonsense for too long, you're going to have a race war.
Well, and that'll be, let's say, the least of our worries, but that would only be in the context of the rest of society also falling apart and it turning into chaos, which is what they want. And that's, to understand and see these things in the context of the larger movement of the times. This didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
This didn't originate even anytime recently. I mean, by name, these theories and philosophies were developed in like the late 80s and 90s or so, the early 90s. And so, but even then, it precedes that because it's all part of a cultural Marxist movement. And so people hear some of these things equated together and they're quick to dismiss, like, oh, here you go. You're overblowing it. You're overhyping the concern here. That must be some of your white guilt trying to suppress the real issue of racial injustice and your unwillingness to relent your hegemonic position in the society because you fear losing your status and privilege that goes along with it. All these things that are just built into the way they argue that prevents or attempts to prevent people from actually engaging the ideas. But what we see that there is a philosophic lineage and heritage that comes that these particular ideas are birthed out of, and they connect directly to a Marxist philosophies,
Yeah.
going back through what is it like? This specifically comes out of the critical legal studies.
Yeah.
But that goes back to like Marcuse
Yeah.
and Gramsci, the Frankfurt School,
yeah.
after World War II. But then before that, it's directly linked to Marx and his ideas, and even before that, Hegel and others. So there's a particular philosophic lineage we could point to. We can see where these ideas come from, and that they are godless in their origin, and that where they pinpoint how they view the worldview. This is not an analytical tool. This is a worldview system that allows people to see the world a certain way, or that creates a framework to view the world through, that defines classes of people based on their status in society. And so you have the oppressors and the oppressed, and those who are in the dominant position of society, the hegemonic position, the ones who have the power and control in society, and those who don't. And this worldview sees the struggle as between these two classes or statuses of people. And that's how they interpret the whole world and all the things that happen in society. And so they're trying to disrupt what they see as the status quo and flip it on its head, or to rework it in some kind of way. And the way they do that is to try to help this oppressed class of people, who make up the majority in the numbers of all the peoples in the world, see themselves as oppressed by these others who are keeping them down.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that there's not realities here to look at and understand. Sure. That's not what we're suggesting, that there's not there's not or haven't been oppressive people and oppressed people along the way. But is that the ultimate framework through which you understand and define reality, and bring that into our current day and time, in the framework with which you understand what's going on, in our systems and how our society operates? Is that your base assumption, along with that there is no God involved in the matter, but that there's just this struggle between people, because materialist, naturalist kind of worldview is all there really is.
Well, Karl Marx, you said it, Karl Marx, what we see is that he failed in his objective to unite the working class, right? He failed. World War I comes along, and he finds out that people were more in tune and loyal to their God, their family, and their country, right? And his disciples saw that.
Right.
And they watched that, and they went, okay, why did he fail? Well, he failed because of those three things, right? Individualism, he failed because of God, he failed because of family, and he failed because of country. And so his disciples, who were of the Frankfurt School, they get ran out of Germany because of Hitler, who rises up.
They fail like the Lenins and those going into
That's right.
the World Wars. They try to carry it out on Marxist terms. It's not successful. So those after World War II take a different
That's right. They run
approach.
Because Hitler, he's coming up in fascism. So they leave Germany, and guess where they come? New York City, Columbia College.
Yeah, Ivy League America.
Come on in, right? That's right, Ivy League America. So they come in, and like you said, Gramsci, The Prison Notebooks, I think that's his book, The Prison Notebooks. You can go read it, flipping scary stuff. But The Prison Notebooks, what he basically lays out as their playbook. And their playbook was they recognized what they had to do. They had to infiltrate the institutions, right? They recognized that as long as the Western world were individuals, and they were judged based off individuality, other than collectivism, as long as they had a God in the heavens who they all were, surrendered to or accountable to, other than government, as long as
define their moral framework,
other than government telling them how to live,
or living for your own
that's right,
passions and pleasures.
As long as they have a family to turn to or community to turn to,
to get the support that you need.
That's right. Welfare doesn't work, and until we
It's
can
a
give
strong,
them stuff.
stable society when the
That's right.
family unit is strong.
That's right. And as long as we can't give them stuff, then
Communities are strong.
we can't control them, right? So we got to tear that down so we can be their source of income, so we can tell them what to do and give them the ideas to believe in. And then finally, we have to destroy their patriotism, right? They cannot be a patriot group of people. There can't be something that unifies them. These grouping of ideas that unify them as one nation. We have to divide them up into collective groups that cause them to fight one another. So, in saying all that, there's something you can see, right? Talking about testify to history. What do you see happening right now in our country, in our world? If you don't think cultural Marxism and critical race theory has been employed over the last X amount of years, and you don't see it
we're talking
unfolding,
50, 60,
Yes.
70 years. We're not talking about just the last couple of years, not even the last couple of decades.
yeah, individuality doesn't exist anymore. You're judged based on your collective group. God, we've evicted God. Government reigns and rules supreme over our country. Families are falling apart. Fatherlessness, the biggest problem in the family today. Divorce rate at an all-time high. We can go through different implementations of how they got here, and we will eventually, right? Policies and all that stuff and how they arrived at these places to get us this point. Patriotism, what the heck's that? Like America, if you don't look at the Olympics, just look at the Olympics. If you don't watch the Olympics and go, the rest of the world's got to be looking at us and going, those idiots, like they're what? Like they're kneeling because of their country? The freest and most prosperous country on earth, and they're kneeling? Like, what a bunch of garbage. Like the world's got to be looking at us like that and just going, what an idiots.
Well, and we have to see in this that, following these great wars and the role of the United States in that, becoming through the Industrial Revolution and the buildup to World War II, the most powerful industrial nation in the world. And so those with a different agenda for humankind realized that the United States was standing in the way of any agenda they might have to take over and control things and for their own motive and agenda. And so they recognize that they need to proceed along these lines, in particularly within Europe, Western civilization, where many of these ideas flow out of in their most cohesive kind of form, though they're, of course, valued all over the world. But particularly the United States, because our identity historically has coalesced around these very things. It is those very things that have driven us, that have been the backbone of our culture, that have enabled us to succeed as a nation and to ultimately become the greatest, most prosperous and powerful nation in the world. With all of the flaws and problems that we've had, it's because of those values that we've been able to persevere through them and be working toward a goal and a hope for our people. Yeah. And that's what's driven us. And we all could catch that vision and unite under it, even though we might have been at odds with one another, because we knew the truth of we believed that the truth of those things were not our truth, but they were God-given truths. Yes,
they're self-evident. By the you know the thing. They were self-evident by you know the thing.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
The thing being our Creator, who gives us certain inalienable rights.
They can't be taken away by government because they're not given by government.
Yeah.
They're given by God.
Yeah, he didn't know. He couldn't say God because the government.
And so we recognize.
So sad.
Well, and that's
so sad.
We don't want to misidentify the threat of critical race theory as much as we might get passionate about it and see it for the serious threat that it is. We don't want to underappreciate the threat that it is by only seeing it in our current modern context and not identifying it as the result of, as an outflow from, as the current manifestation of this philosophy and worldview that can be traced throughout history, and not just an idea. Ideas have consequences. This idea,
good and bad,
these ideas have been mobilized. This enemy that is at work ultimately, that is a spiritual enemy, he is greater than any of these individuals, any of these humans. And that's too where we, as Christians, respecting a biblical framework for reality, we see a spiritual battle taking place, and so we recognize that there are spiritual forces at work guiding these processes, and so we don't want to detach the events happening and before our eyes from the powers and forces behind them that guide them.
And our argument is not American exceptionalism. Our argument, you said it's a spiritual battle. It was just as much a spiritual battle in the days of slavery. Right? That was a spiritual battle in this nation as well, in looking at people less than made in the image of God. But we have a foundation in which we can say that was wrong. Right? We have and in fact, Darwin would say that's the actual right way of doing things, right? But my point is this: we're not saying that America has never violated its values. It absolutely has. In some ways, it has grossly violated its values. What we're saying, and catch this, is that because we have these stated values, it has allowed political correction. Do you catch that? We are not saying that we have not violated the idea that we have inalienable rights given to us not by man or government, but by God, defined not by a constitution, but by a word, defined by a word, and that we have those, therefore you cannot take those from an individual. And we have grossly violated those things from time to time, but we have also been the nation because of those things and those stated values that came from a book, came from a book that is true. We have risen up out of those faster than we're the ones. We didn't start slavery, but by God, we ended it. And we ended it because of this. That's why we ended it, and because of our stated values. And we said, you know what? It's time to correct this nonsense. All men are created in the image of God, and they have inalienable rights that should not be able to be taken from them because of the color of their skin. Do away with it. And then we had one of the bloodiest wars we've ever seen over that. And all you crazy kooks out there that go, it wasn't over slavery. It was over prosperity and business. Guess what? If it's over business, the North and the South would have came together. I'm a business owner and would have said, hey, let's keep this thing called slavery because our margins are high up and we ain't got to pay labor. That's the biggest bunch of nonsense. But my point is, it's because of those stated values that have allowed political correction in our country. And we've seen it at such a fast rate. And it's not because of our Constitution, it's because of God's Word and what our Constitution was built upon. It's because we started with a correct foundation that allowed us to move forward. And now we're throwing that foundation away, which is allowing us to deconstruct back into chaos. And nope, you better wake up, because chaos is where all this ends, because that's what they want. They want chaos. They're not here for unity. They're not here for unity. This cultural Marxist group, this critical race theory group, this intersectionality group, this white privilege group, all these people interjecting these words into our society and then getting us to fight amongst one another with them, they do not want a unified nation, because a unified nation doesn't need the government. They don't need government because they have one another. They have their neighbor. But if we can divide the neighbors, then we have them. We have them. And that's what's happening today. And it is what will continue to happen until we get back to this. Until we get back to this and what God says.
Well, and the danger of identifying ourselves in group collectives is that then we assign the blame to the collective. So when you point to the United States of America and say, America is at fault, America did this, or see the problems in America, so we identify America as a problem that we need to get away, move away from, start something new. But we're not not trying to excuse the actions and behaviors
Of individuals.
of our in the overall movement and trajectory of our nation over time, and some of the things that have been dominant in society. But that has been a result of many people with different worldviews, and there are different times in which some prevailed over others, but there was a fight for ideas taking place that guided the passions and convictions of those people. And like you're saying, when there were those who had this as their foundation, and they were the ones who ultimately fought to found this nation on the particular values of our Constitution and the things that we hold and cherish so ideal, that seem to be the best of what humanity can produce. And that's what people today and all across the world, and even the people in our country who are so disappointed in who we are at times, you still value those truths because there's something in you that testifies that it's true, that it is what is good. And those truths are from God. And only do you learn that and have a firm foundation for that through this scripture. And it has been through the trajectory of our history, as well as how the world history has played out in Western civilization and all these things. But the people who believed in this were the ones who fought for the best of values. And of course, you can find exceptions where Christians use the Bible to endorse slavery, to promote it, to advance it, that kind of thing. Those people were wrong. That was sin. And they were fought against in those ideas by other Christians who ultimately prevailed when we outlawed slavery. In the West, in England, Christians in the West, in England and the United States,
It's not outlawed all over the world.
yeah, and it wouldn't be if it were not for these white people, in these Western civilizations who were Christian, who valued the Word of God and fought and sacrificed and died even for the truth of that, because they knew that the only way forward for our nation, for our people, for humanity was to reject these false ideas that we had been living on and move more fully into the truth.
The narrative of the day tries to present America as this nation that was just throughout the history of slavery as just everybody was all in. And then all of a sudden somebody had a bright idea of going, I don't think that's right. That's how it's presented today, right?
Yeah.
It's like
all the people of color were standing there in unison saying, this is wrong,
right.
Because another assumption that it's all based on racism and not economics and other things. But
my point is, it's as if, like you were saying, collectively as America, we were just all racist, right? Instead of, no, from the very beginning of bringing slavery into the country, people were like, wait a second, this doesn't hold true to the values that we present ourselves to be. And even if you go back and actually read history, I know that's a novel thought these days, right? Don't listen to somebody tell you history. Go back and read some of these authors that were in the South. I mean, some of these political figures and just figures that were in the South that had slaves. Even they were struggling internally with the idea of having slaves, but they were like, I'm making a lot of money. I don't think this is okay, right? So
everybody else is doing it.
That's right. If I don't do it, then I'm going to lose all my money. I'm going to lose all my power and my esteem, but I know this isn't really right. So there's this internal struggle of the flesh, of sin, right? It wasn't just, I hate black people and I'm going to put them in those fields, right? I mean, that's how it's presented though, right? And then to top it off, which makes it even better, is a godless system such as CRT comes in and has to hijack the godly system to be able to make their argument to begin with that racism is wrong. Right? I'm like, absurdity, right? Do you understand what I just said? The godless system of critical race theory, which is a godless system of secularism, naturalism, Karl Marx, Hegel, all those guys, godless men, has to come in and hijack the righteousness of the godly system in order to make the argument that racism was wrong.
Yeah, that there's a moral objective.
Racism was right if Karl Marx and the guys presenting critical race theory and cultural Marxism, if they're true, racism was the perfect idea.
Well, it just goes to show you the inconsistency and the hypocrisy of the worldview, because it's the godless people, it's the Darwinian evolution perspective that sees different people as evolving along different developmental paths.
Godlessness did not free the black slaves.
No.
Godlessness did not free
Godlessness and those who embraced a Darwinian worldview, naturalism, materialism, that what you see is all there is and it's all that matters. Therefore, we are God. We set the rules. It's that kind of worldview that justified slavery and all kinds of other oppressive systems, because it's survival of the fittest. It's whoever's the strongest. Might is right. And so that prevailed in a lot of these respects until people who believed God fought and resisted against it and struggled through it until it prevailed and took over and became the new dominant world position. And then, however imperfectly, because you still have this fallen worldview that's very pervasive. And as we've said, it loses ground, but then it plots a way to regain its ground. And after World War II, up through the countercultural movements of the 60s and 70s, it gained ground in America. And what we're saying is these godless philosophies and worldviews have taken over our institutions and systems in society, the same ones we're always pointing at. Of course, the government, but more importantly, education, the media, those being the big ones, but the healthcare system. And we see them now all coalescing around the same kind of agenda, with the same kind of worldview, promoting the same kind of paths forward,
but
with
why?
all the voices in unison, rallying together with the same worldview. And if you as a Christian find yourself aligning with this hegemonic influence in society, but yet all the guiding philosophy and worldview of these peoples is not one that's consistent with your supposed biblical worldview, then might you question what side you're on?
Well, because like you said, through the 60s and 70s, we were becoming more unified. Like people were awakening because of this value structure, right? And so, like you said, it's a process. Nothing happens overnight. It's a process, right? And people that were racist and had been taught to judge people by the color of their skin versus by someone's individuality and their character started to change their mind, not out of nowhere, but because of ideas and thoughts and values that they couldn't, again, stay consistent with. They couldn't say, "Oh, but God said this, but I'm racist towards this person because of their skin color." But we're all made in the image of God. How do I do that, right? And so their ideas and their values were internally struggling, and we saw that struggle happening, and we started to become into the 90s and the early 2000s. Like, it was pretty beautiful how unified we were as a nation in terms of a group of people, which is, by the way, a really odd nation to begin with, a bunch of immigrants from all over the place with all different types of people. We were wildly unified when you take into consideration what we were made up of. When you take into consideration what America's made up of, we were wildly unified.
There's no other melting pot society like the United States and the whole world, where people from all these diverse backgrounds get along as well as they do. And even with such ugly histories behind them, between them.
Yes. And we're unified in a lot of ways, to a degree, under the idea, if not the idea of the Christian God, the values and principles of the Christian God. We're aligned and unified under patriotism in a lot of ways. We're united under the idea that united under the idea that family, the nuclear family, matters. Right? We're united around these things in these beliefs that come from this. Right? And then all of a sudden, and I'm not saying all of a sudden it came out of nowhere. It was being in the 70s put into our system. But a big one to me was the infiltration in the 70s. All the men go off to war and all the Not men stay behind, and I'm not talking about women, I'm talking about not men, stay behind and work in the education system and put all these radical ideas in our minds. And then all of a sudden, Obama comes on the scene and has the opportunity to put this to rest, really, right? We as a nation just elected a black president, right? We have a chance to go, okay, we're doing pretty good. Like, I totally disagree with his policies, and I elect people based on their policies, but we as a nation elected a black president. And instead of that being a message of unity, they flip it on its head through this bullshit. And every time he does something wrong and you want to criticize a policy, immediately it becomes, because I'm black. It's because I'm black, a bunch of racist. It's systemically racist, all of it. And since then, the systemic racist card has been played unanimously. If you have anything to say about the policy of Obama or any other black individual or the activities or actions of those people, it's because you're racist. Inherently, you don't know it, right? You're colorblind. It's your meritocracy, right? You can't see it, so just poor you. You're a racist. So like, these are the things we see from a big picture, right? We see these things being implemented. So instead of pursuing unity, Obama, and saying, hey, you don't like my policy, that's fine. Obviously, we're not racist. We just elected me, in for a second term too, in a big way. But anyways, I'm just painting some broad strokes here.
Yeah, and we, of course, without getting into the details of other aspects of this today,
of course, we don't see it that simply, or like these things are working their way in our society, undermining the integrity of who we are, our identity as a nation, the things that we value most, the things that we believe that are God-given values that we know are crucial as our foundation to build our nation upon, our families, our communities. And those being undermined through all of these systems from different angles, they begin to coalesce in a significant way around the same time as the Obama administration.
Yes.
And I would say that in part because the driving agenda behind it that really has nothing to do with race, but it is a godless agenda. That intends to use race as one aspect of how to divide the people, but it's coming to a certain end game of sorts, or a desire to bring their agenda to some greater climax and fulfillment of that plan. And so, and that one is where the nation, because of its values and the identity of a people, united around that identity and values, are strong because of those beliefs. And the United States being the nation that most embodies the pride around that, but as well as the true values and beliefs that need to make up a strong nation. The attempts at undermining that, subverting it, weakening it from within have been in the works for decades. But now, and because they've been effective, perhaps during this time that things seem pretty united because we're comfortable, we're content, we're entertained, all these things, and they're working their way through our systems. And we're not on guard as a people. And subtly, our children are being
implement a few ideas, and all that stuff starts coming up.
And there's other things to look at: the rise, the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of communist China, China being integrated into the world economic system, the move toward establishing China as the center of globalism and the globalist economy, the move from our leadership in this nation under Bush 1, in particularly, to move us into a new world order.
Fiscal policy surrounding
the
Federal
it's
Reserve.
policies.
I mean, it's all this stuff, right? I mean, if you...
The wars
I'm trying
in the Middle East. There's so much to say here, so we'll refrain from going there today. In order
the Federal Reserve and fiscal policy could be 5-hour clip.
There's so much to this that we're
But that's our point. It's this big movement, right? We're not trying to get caught up, but we have to talk about these things like the election and the virus, which we'll talk about next week, and how all that we feel like plays into it. But that's not our primary. Our primary is not to argue with you about the election and the virus. Our primary is to try to tell you to back up and don't get sucked into these things as individual current events that stand alone in a vacuum. They're not. They're a part of this big scope of things that have been happening for a very long time.
So we say the movement of the
times.
There's
an agenda and a goal at the end of this.
And where's it going?
Where's it going?
We want to understand where is it leading. It's not just happening.
Yeah.
This is being guided. There's an intention behind where all this is going, and we need to see it for what it is.
From up here and down here.
Yeah, so and see how these things relate to that so that we can begin to do something about it, and just the awareness to it all, being keen to what might actually be really happening is kind of where we come in. I mean, and we're open to all the many, and it'll mean different things. How to not live your life in vain will mean something different for Caleb than in me in certain ways, in certain expressions. Who we're called to be as individuals is different, but we all relate to one another. We're meant to be connected. The body is meant to act together in unity and harmony. That's where the church needs to have a certain peace. Paul says we need to pray for the leaders and rulers so that we can have peace in our times, and that's so that we can have the environment conducive to spreading the gospel. Well, right now we need to pray for our leaders and rulers because there's not an environment conducive to the spread of the gospel, except for the way that the gospel flourishes under suppression and persecution and things like that, because it's only moving that direction. But the church itself needs to be unified under a right biblical perspective, right doctrines, right understandings, to see who the enemy is. And the enemy is not flesh and blood. It's spiritual, but it manifests through ideas that are held by people. And so we argue, we take those thoughts and we wrestle in that battleground of ideas, and we take the thoughts captive to Christ, and we subject these philosophies to the truth of the kingdom of God. And that's the battle that we are fighting, and we don't shy away from it, because it must be done, or otherwise we're just sheep being led to the slaughter.
Amen. Amen. Hey guys, thank you again for tuning in to Kingdom Come. 2 things you can help us out with. 1, subscribe, and 2, comment. The YouTube algorithm is not conducive to the type of channel that we are doing, obviously. So being able to comment and subscribe will really help us out. We don't want your money. We don't want anything from you, but those 2 things will really help us out. And also share. This is something me and Dustin, we don't do this to make a living on. We do this because we are convicted surrounding what we're talking about and the need of what we're talking about for the churches and Christians to know these things so that we can communicate these things well out there in the public square.